Hey, everybody, here today with Brady Josephson, and he is a huge online fundraiser working for Next After. Brady, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Seems we're in a nice little cubbies, ready to just have this casual conversation about fundraising. And I gotta know, what the heck is Next After?
It's a good question. So, the name comes out of this idea of, well, what's next after that? You know, we spend a lot of time in the nonprofit space, figure out what's now. What's now. At some point, we got to figure out what's next after that. So that's where the name comes from. And what we do is our mission is to decode what works in fundraising and make it as accessible to as many nonprofits as possible. So we do that through experimentation, testing, and research. So our main business is actually consulting, and we'll run a number of experiments. We'll analyze data, look at trends and patterns to figure out how do we fundraise better, and we do that by trying to understand donors. They're the only ones who can really tell us what works in fundraising. We can all have our opinions all day long, but it's really what do donors actually respond to. So that's the bulk of our business. But me and my team, we work more on the research and training side. So we try to figure out across all these experiments, across all these clients, across all this data that we're seeing, what is it that really moves the needle when it comes to online fundraising? We codify that, translate it into things like courses and workshops and ebooks and webinars so that kind of all nonprofits can benefit from some of this knowledge and understanding of donors. So that's really what uh, Next After is about.
Daughter came home. The dogs are going berserk. Uh,
Oh, I couldn't hear him at all. So
so it's no big deal. So you actually run experiments and collect data and see what nonprofits are actually doing, what actually works, and do the things that donors say actually mean anything to them. I thought that was pretty interesting. As I understand it, you're under the opinion that donors lie, and you came to that conclusion through a little bit of research. And it's definitely an attention-grabbing headline. Might even be the title of the show is "Donors Lie." But what does that mean, and how do you determine that they're big fat liars?
yeah, well, two things. One, trying to tell the truth, what they think, what they believe. There's always kernels of truth. What I mean by donors are liars is when you do surveys or if you ask donors certain questions like, why do you give? Or how did you hear about us? Or even more so,
I lost all of that, brother.
okay,
We're gonna
you want to
try.
go back to the start of the question?
Let's kill the video. I'm gonna give it another shot here.
All right.
I'm gonna restate the donors lie thing. Oh, okay, we got such nice pictures. Isn't that great? So we were talking before we got the show started, and you said something that really just caught my ear, and that's donors lie. And they lie about what they want, what they like, because you guys do the research behind the scenes and find out if what they say they don't like is really accurate. What do you mean by donors lie?
Yeah, it is kind of attention grabbing, isn't it? So, I mean, donors are humans, and all humans suffer from the inability to really understand their own behavior, particularly when it comes to online transactions or online giving, as well as philanthropic giving. So, when you ask a donor things like, well, why did you give? It's actually very, very difficult for you or me or any of us to clearly articulate why we give. It's something that's so deep rooted, so values based, it's something so ingrained in us. It's hard for us to kind of bring it to the surface. But the more the type of research that we do, which is really around online giving, so landing pages, donation pages, emails, Facebook posts, Facebook ads, when we look at user behavior, when people are making such quick decisions, like you are when you open your email inbox, uh, it's impossible for us to actually understand how we flag certain emails as that's important, that's not important, I'll read this, I won't read this. So then when we stop and try to reflect on what we think that we want in terms of emails, frequency, who they come from, what we want to see on a donation page, we're lying to ourselves, and then we're lying when we give those responses to surveys and things like that. So what we'll often see is people say, you know, emails got to be really short, quick to the point, nobody reads. And I can't tell you how many times we've seen that a long email outperforms a shorter email, generally speaking. One of the most famous experiments is we had a 2,200 word email outperform a 550 word email, which is already above average. So this idea that short always beats long isn't true, or it has to have a video. We've seen video decrease giving, or you should include images. We must always have images. We've seen images decrease giving. We see when you lower email volume, not only does giving go down, but engagement goes down. So all these things that donors think they want videos, they want less email. A lot of these things are actually antithetical to fundraising, or they actually depress giving. And we only learn that by actually testing and monitoring user and donor behavior.
Yeah, see, I would have had that all backwards. I definitely would have
Yeah,
said more videos, more pictures, got to do it this way. I've even talked to a few different companies that focus on video, not testimonials, so to speak, but video thank yous or video, this is what we did with your money emails. So donors can get that feel good on, is their money making an impact? But you're saying that video isn't necessarily the way?
when you're asking for donations, no. The scenario that you just talked about is a very different one. The goal of that email isn't to get a donation. The goal of that email is to more strongly build a relationship, to report back. That's a great usage of video. So this is what I think is difficult is people often say some shorter emails work great, some video works great, but in the context of when you were trying to get someone to move from engagement to giving, no, I've seen very, very little to no evidence to say that video is actually useful in that final step. In other parts of that journey, 100%. After they become a donor, absolutely. But just because video works in one context doesn't mean that we should use video in all contexts. And that's part of the sophistication and journey that we and everyone are on, as we still figure out how do people actually engage with brands and organizations online.
See, I think I kind of can connect with the donors on this aspect. I don't know what it is about video, but I'm not interested. When I'm scrolling through Facebook, LinkedIn, or whatever, I am not interested in the dang video. I want to read. I don't know why. I know I'm not like everybody else. Everyone says, "Oh, video is the way to go," but I rarely have earphones or headphones with me. I'm almost always in a crowded place, or I'm in a place where the signal is just horrendous, so video is not going to load for me. And I would much rather read, for instance, the news than to watch the news. I feel like if I'm reading it in my own tone of voice in my own head, I can make a more informed decision on whatever the thing is that's in front of me. And if I have video, I feel like they're making me feel a certain way, and I don't like that, feeling stuff.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. And I mean, images fall into the same bucket as videos, where you don't leave as much space for you, the reader, to use your own brain to fill in the gaps, right? One of the beauties of text and no images is you can evoke certain emotions, or you can call on certain like schemas or metaphors or things that you know, and your brain is working, and that means it's engaged, which means you're probably more likely to actually retain the information and maybe even make a decision. Whereas when we use visuals, we have to be very, very careful that it communicates what we think. Case in point, there's this debate, sad kid versus happy kid. And one person may see a photo of a happy child and go, this kid's happy. There's nothing for me as the donor to do here, or there's no need. Whereas someone else may see a happy kid and go like, oh, wow, I can make that kid happy. Same image, two totally different experiences. One not good for fundraising and one good for fundraising. So often what we find in our testing, at least, is there is sometimes where an image helps, and there can be odd situations where video helps, but generally speaking, it's too risky. So just rely on the things that allow you to better connect with the donor and let them use their own brain to come to the conclusion, which is that giving is good or they should make a donation.
So if we're getting rid of pictures and we're getting rid of videos, and we're talking about just the text, in business terms and professional world, that's called writing copy. So do you have like on your website, or your team has available, like really cool copywriting techniques or how to?
Yeah, we do. It's an area of growth. I mean, we spend so much time focused on copy. We're always trying to figure out how do we do it better. But we hired someone by the name of Amy Harrison, who's a professional copywriter in the UK, who focuses on persuasion or conversion copywriting. So that's another kind of key distinction, right, is there's great storytellers and copywriters, but there's a different form of copy that's focused on conversion or action taking. So that's her area of expertise. And we kind of built a copywriting for nonprofits course with her. And it's about 5 hours, and it kind of goes through these different tips and techniques and tactics that people can use to write persuasive copy, particularly online. So that's kind of one thing. We talk a lot in our other courses or other training that we try to simplify it a bit, and the copy really needs to answer this question in the mind of the donor: why should I give to you as opposed to another organization or not at all? That's fundamentally what we call the value proposition question. So any donor, really, large donor, small donor, online donor, offline donor, that's fundamentally the question that every nonprofit is trying to answer in the mind of their donor. And that's partly what your copy is trying to answer in some way. Now, there's different ways that you can attack it at different times, but we categorize the answer into 4 buckets. One is appeal. Will someone actually like it or identify with it? Is there credibility behind it? Just because you say so doesn't mean that they should necessarily trust you. Is it clear? This is the most important one, is just clarity. We often say clarity trumps persuasion. The amount of kind of vague, nonprofit-y speak that we all do and we're all guilty of is rampant. It's all over the place. So we got likability, credibility, clarity, and I'm blanking on the 4th one right now. I'm sorry.
Was it appeal?
Sorry?
Was it appeal?
Appeal was the first. So appeal and likability, credibility and trustworthiness. It's exclusivity. What's unique to you, right? There's a lot of nonprofits that there's a lot of nonprofits that help veterans. What makes your particular nonprofit different or unique to me? And sometimes that's as simple as just saying, we're based in Oklahoma City. That's a unique differentiator for an organization. It can be, right? Is this regional basis or faith basis or non-faith basis? There's some pretty simple ways, but when we analyze organizations so much, it's, we provide hope and healing to veterans in the United States. That's kind of like the mission or the tagline. It's very difficult for a donor to understand why they should support that organization as opposed to another one. So that's a long answer to a shorter question, but yes, we have some things on that. And what you're trying to get at the end of the day for fundraising is an answer to that question.
I kind of look at it, there's really 2 styles, maybe even a third, but you definitely have like a qualifiable and a quantifiable. Quantifiable is a thing. It's something you can count, right? If you're feeding 1,100 homeless people a week, you can count that. And I know that if I give money, it goes to X amount of meals. X amount of dollars equals X amount of meals. It's really straightforward. I feel good for helping X amount of people. I know exactly what's going on. It's easier. It's straightforward, in my opinion. And then you have like the veteran cause you brought up, right? Me being active duty myself, I get contacted from many veterans organizations. And it's much harder to say what it is that you really do. And then on the back end, you have to get a veteran who likely suffers from TBI or PTSD to admit that they had a problem, that you help them in order to create that testimonial or that before and that after that you can show people, because it's harder to picture what that looks like unless you're showing them what your program has done for them. And it's a very different fundraising aspect. Would you agree?
Yeah, it is. I think what's interesting when we do the different types of research, every kind of industry or vertical, like veterans or animals, there's always like a grass is greener, so the counterpoint to veterans would be it's such an easily identifiable connection to make emotionally, where everyone has some affinity or connection to a family member or a service member, to understand, at least to a degree, what that looks like. Whereas there's certain, causes or diseases or whatever it might be that are maybe more tangible or more quantifiable, but have no emotional connection. I've never heard of it. So that's a whole other challenge to solve. So I think what I've come to realize is every different organization, no matter how big, no matter how small, no matter what vertical, has strengths and weaknesses, has opportunities and challenges, and they're not always the same. But I do agree that generally speaking, having something that's more quantifiable or tangible does lead to generosity. There's quite a bit of research out there that shows that tangibility leads to generosity. Now, positioning it in terms of 11,000 people maybe isn't actually the smartest thing. There's something called proportional impact effect. When we use large numbers, it's actually demotivating at times. What does my $10 do in the face of 11,000 people? So even saying, it can help one person or 1 in 10, the way that we frame things actually makes a big difference when we're trying to be more tangible, more clear, or quantifiable.
I like that. Tangibility leads to generosity. People don't invest in things that they don't understand. And if they don't have a clear vision of what you do and that you're able to
Correct.
deliver, they're not going to invest and say yes with their dollars uh, to help your cause.
Yeah, and the thing that we'll often find is, we know ourselves, we know organizations, and so we talk to kind of insiders and people just like us and people that we know, but the person who's arm's length from us doesn't actually know that much, and so it's for them that we need to be even more clear and even more tangible. So that's really where that comes into difference, and that's really a challenge for small nonprofits, honestly, is how you raise your first $50,000, $100,000. It's friends, it's family, it's people it's people that you have a direct connection with, generally speaking, and how you tell the story to them is very different than how you tell it to the friends of the friends, or when you're trying to raise your $500,000 or $1 million or whatever that number is. When you start getting in those second, third degree connections, they don't know you, they don't know your story. So that's where this messaging, this clarity, this tangibility becomes extra important, and it's a hurdle that we see a lot of smaller organizations struggle with. Once that first network is kind of tapped out, they need to actually change a bit of how they tell their story, because it doesn't connect in the same way to people that don't know them like that.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And we've kind of been talking about email this whole time. Is there like, so someone getting started, maybe they are a one person shop or a two-person shop, and they've got this endless list of things they can do as a new nonprofit. Where would you put email communications and follow through in electronic method? Where would you rank that? Is that something that can wait down the road? Is that something people should get started with right away? Should that be a primary focus?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'd say two things. One, building more of like a scalable fundraising infrastructure, of which email is one of those strategies. Um, you always need to start on that a little sooner than you think. It's often not the biggest priority. If you have 100 donors, 500 donors, optimizing and growing your email list is not the most important thing. But if you wait until you've totally maximized your current networks, now you're behind the eight ball, because it takes some time to actually build up a program, figure out how to get emails, how to deliver emails. So that's why we often encourage of say, you should start chipping away now. Have a way for someone to sign up for emails. Deliver at least one email a month. There's some simple things you can do to get an email program off the ground and have it be functional, so that as you kind of grow and expand, you have some of the infrastructure in place. Why I do think it's important to maybe not consider email as like a pure fundraising channel, but every donor, young, old, high level, high value or not, you can use email to communicate to them. So for example, when we look at data, we see that offline donors, so people that only write checks, are worth 90% more if they just get emails. That means they never give online. All they do is they get emails. They're worth 90% more, and all they do is write checks. That'll never show up in metrics like online giving, but we know that there's value in sending people emails. So whether it's a major donor and you're providing an update of a report or impact, that's an email-based strategy. So there's huge value in email, even if it's not, how do we get 10,000 emails and raise $50 from each of them? That's a mass strategy, but there's still value in email outside of that.
That's really cool. So you guys do, experiments that way, but you also do like this mystery shopper angle, which I think is very interesting when you apply that to nonprofits. What do you mean by a mystery shopper?
Yeah, so if the experiments are really how do donors respond, what we're trying to do in these mystery shopper studies are what are nonprofits doing, right? So if we know, for example, like longer plain form emails generate a better fundraising response, are nonprofits doing that? And so the only way to figure that out really is to get their emails. So that's what we do. we make donations and we sign up for emails, and we'll capture that experience of making the online donation or signing up for email. And then we receive emails. We receive thousands of emails every single day from nonprofits all over the world. And we'll do a different analysis of 45-day periods or higher ed only or small nonprofits. And we'll look at the different trends and patterns to see. And what we're trying to do is marry up, if we know that this concept, again, say longer, more plain emails works in fundraising, are nonprofits doing it? And the answer is no. It's somewhere between 5%, 10% max use that type of strategy or approach in their fundraising emails. So that's a huge gap or a huge delta between what is kind of proven to work and what nonprofits are doing. So that's where we spend a lot of time talking about that, because that's where we think there's a big opportunity. So that's what we're really trying to do in these mystery shopper studies, is like, what are nonprofits doing and what's this gap between what we think or know works and what they're actually doing, because that's the opportunity.
I like that. And something you said really kind of sparked an idea of me. So if you are a new nonprofit and you don't have a budget per se, you could become the mystery shopper like Brady's talking about. You could sign up on an email list on a nonprofit in your industry, maybe someone that you look up to, and you can see what kind of emails you receive from them. And you and maybe your small team or you and your board can look at that and decide what emails you might decide to send.
Yeah, I think that's a decent starting point. The danger, though, is, do they know what they're doing? Is what they're doing working? I think that's part of the reason why we're in the situation we are, where because we don't have the data, we'll do a lot of copycat. I like this organization, or this is an organization I support, or this is an organization I admire, or a big one. We assume that the big ones know what they're doing, and that's a dangerous assumption to make. And then we see, oh, here's how they send their emails. They're short and full of images, so that's what we should do in our emails. So it's great to see that experience, but again, it's so hard for us to distance ourselves from this bias that we have of our own personal opinions, our own experience. So I'd say that's part of the equation. We can also look at more rigorous data or evidence around what's working, instead of just, here's what they do or here's what I like. So it's a decent starting point. I agree with you, but it's not the end point, right? It's just one data point.
So we have all this talk out there, the standard knowledge, make sure you thank every donor, handwritten letter, maybe a thank you email or a follow-up email. You're doing the research. Are nonprofits doing that? Are they thanking their donors?
Not well enough is the short answer. No, we're actually in the analysis stage of a multi-channel study where we gave a $20 donation online and a $20 donation offline to the same organization, but two different names, two different addresses, two different phone numbers. And then we tracked all the communication, email, phone, text, and mail for 4 months. And what we're trying to see is, A, what's that onboarding process look like across those channels at all? And what's the difference between the online and the offline donor? And we see this every single time, where there's kind of an initial thank you. It's often automated. Maybe there's one additional thank you, very, very, very few phone calls. And once we get beyond kind of like 2 weeks, like the honeymoon stage is over. There's no more, thanking or gratitude. It's like, here's our regular newsletter. And we think that this first kind of 30, 45-day window is actually one of the most critical times in the life of a donor or a new donor. And so this is where we should be trying to do everything we can, send thank you letters, do phone calls, send multiple emails, do whatever we can to engage the donor while they're engaged. Because the reality is, if they don't make a second gift by about 6 months, or definitely 13, 14 months, they're basically dead. They're basically gone for most organizations. So this first time period is absolutely critical for this trajectory of this donor and their engagement and relationship with you.
That is crazy. There's a life cycle of a donor. I imagine, with the digital age that we're in, it's so easy to grab our attention or to have a new thing, a new shiny object, pull us away from whatever we're doing. If you look at the news cycle, most things
Yeah.
last a day and a half tops. We have a little strange time where we've got some COVID going on, and we've got some protest/rioting across the U.S. that maybe have our attention a little bit more. But by and large, regular news cycle, you might have one, but no more than really 3 days tops on a topic. So if they are engaged with you and they had a great experience, as a donor, and you followed up with them, great. And you don't talk to them for 3 months, I probably wouldn't be engaged either.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. It's maybe somewhat counterintuitive. There's this, idea that, they've just made a donation, so let's thank them briefly, but then kind of, leave them alone. We don't want to bug them or something like that. And what's interesting about that mentality is one, I think it's one that doesn't really understand the value of philanthropy or the joy of giving, right? Like if we really think that donations transform the world or our cause or our mission, and if we really think that giving is good at its own level, to be separated from, consumerism, let alone the fact that you become more happy, more healthy, you experience joy when you give, why are we leaving people alone? We should be kind of in a, obviously, ethical and understanding way. We should be encouraging giving as much as we can. But also when we start looking at the data, so Classy it's a donation tool platform. They did a study of, I think they had 10 million transactions, and looked at when someone was most likely to make a second gift or become a recurring donor. And the most likely time they are to move from a one-time donor to recurring donor is in the second week after they give. And the most likely time they are to make a second donation to an organization outside of their anniversary date is in that first 2-3 weeks. And you look at email metrics, the most open, read, and engaged emails are the first 3 you ever send, right? This is when people are engaged. They remember you, to your point. They're kind of connected. If you wait 3 months, they won't even remember you probably. So there's this real opportunity, and it maybe seems counterintuitive, but again, if we look at human behavior, and if we really think that giving is an act that inspires more giving and it's a positive thing, then we should be able to kind of front load some communications and some of these strategies and try to move people quicker in this engagement while they're engaged.
Now, I know that startup nonprofits often have a lot of barriers, some of which is know-how, but some of it's really, they're not sure if they know what they're doing or if they know they're doing it right. So they're tentative, right? They're maybe a little hesitant to ask for money in the first place. What would you say to those individuals that maybe need a little help getting started?
Yeah, I think that's actually a great point. I think that's probably the biggest barrier to growth, full stop, whether you're a small nonprofit or not, is this, tentativeness, or if you feel like asking is begging, or if you feel like fundraising isn't a part of your mission, if it's something else that you just get money from to do your mission, like all of those philosophical viewpoints make their way in to how we run our organizations. And that's where board and board leadership is incredibly critical. If boards don't understand the value of fundraising, see it as part of the organization, how it's something that, needs to be invested in, not just, reduced or limited, that will make its way down to the ED and the staff person or the volunteers. And that's where kind of this culture of fundraising is really, really important. Dan Pallotta, who's famous for writing a book on charitable, he's got a very famous TED Talk. He's just produced a new course called The Bold Training, and it's really geared towards executives and board members. But it's really about this idea of culture or mindset, or how do we think about fundraising and marketing, because it's really, really damaging. So I think that's one kind of tip maybe for people. I think it's like $99 for their course, so, and there's like group discounts, but that would be something that would be a great board training event. We're going to take this course over the next quarter, and I think that could be a great way for, boards and nonprofits to kind of get more aligned philosophically, which will then allow for more freedom around fundraising. Because if you're tentative, you're not going to raise money, or not as much as you could. Full stop.
Yeah, bold is definitely better. You can't ask. It's a guaranteed no if you don't ask, and if you're scared to ask, they don't trust or believe in you.
And it's one of the things that I think we've learned through the COVID pandemic. There's a very clear line between organizations that have succeeded and organizations that have struggled, and it has everything to do with forging on and not being tentative, asking in uncertain times versus pausing, versus waiting, versus stopping. Some organizations, that's a recipe for disaster, in my opinion, when it comes to fundraising. Being more on the front foot and being able to adapt and is always where I think organizations should lean. Which isn't to say you just blast emails and blast mail. That's not what I'm saying at all. but to be proactive, to be more on the front foot, to be more communicative, I think is always the better posture.
There's definitely a way to continue the ask and do it with a little bit of grace. But I mean, I'm right there with you. We don't know how long this thing is going to continue, right? It's the first time we've collectively, globally taken action against such a small enemy and a
Hmm.
virus, and we don't know if this is going to be done next week or 2 years from now. Are you
Yeah.
telling me, nonprofits out there listening, that you're going to stop fighting for your cause, whatever your cause is, because you can't see people in person?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And one of the critical kind of links to generosity is empathy. At a physiological level, when we experience empathy, something called oxytocin's released. And oxytocin's been directly linked to generosity. And so when we see these spikes of giving around natural disasters or even economic crisis or something like this, there's always an influx of giving. Giving actually goes up in the short term. And I think that's partly because we all have this heightened sense of empathy of, my gosh, imagine being, out of a job right now. Imagine having 3 kids and working from home. Like, I think in a weird way, we've had a heightened sense of empathy, which actually leads to generosity. And so, not that you should, prey on that necessarily, but um, organizations that are communicating and asking are raising tons of money right now, and that's one of the ingredients is this heightened sense of empathy.
Yeah, out of the many organizations I've talked to in the past few months, well, since March, the ones that continued to ask with empathy have had their banner years. They've reached the heights of new heights. And the ones that have been tentative or have paused, many have all but closed up shop, and they've shrank back into the ether. There's something to be said about being bold and doing it with empathy.
Well,
So
and
I
I think
got to
what's
ask,
interesting.
we've
Oh,
got all
sorry.
this digital online stuff. I know I talked to Preston Cohn a couple of months ago about the Google Ad Grant, but I understand that you're a big fan as well. Google Ad Grant.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's not the end all be all solution, but it's a key component to add to the online marketing mix. When it comes to online fundraising, we try to simplify it down. There's really only 3 metrics that matter. One is traffic, how many people visit your website. One's your conversion rate, or how many people that visit your website actually make a donation. And the third is average gift, which is just on average, how much do they give? If you multiply those 3 things together, it equals revenue. So when you're looking, how do I optimize online fundraising? You're looking at, how do I get more traffic, improve my conversion rate, or improve generosity, or ideally a combination of the 3. And so we do that type of analysis on all of our clients and also a lot of our benchmarking studies. And the thing that stands out all the time, particularly for small nonprofits, is a severe lack of traffic. We'll often look at, hey, when people give, they're actually very generous. The average gift to a small nonprofit in a research study we did was over $100. It's fairly high. The conversion rate, typically small organizations have a higher conversion rate because the people visiting the site know you better. Friends and family, they're more likely to convert. So you actually have a higher conversion rate. It's the traffic piece where, again, in this benchmark study, the average small nonprofit was receiving, less than 1,000 visits a month. And if you get less than 1,000 visits a month, it's going to be very, very difficult for online fundraising to make a lot of financial sense. So where the Google Ad Grant comes in is it's a way to kind of tap into a huge traffic source, Google search, for free. You get up to $10,000 of free advertising. Now there's some strings attached. It's not as easy as it maybe sounds. You got to jump through some hoops, and people should go back and listen to your conversation with, is it Preston?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
he can
Preston.
kind of walk people through. So it's a very, very useful tool and a way to boost traffic. And that's often what we suggest organizations do. If say, you've got a great mission, you talk about it, okay, your donation page, okay, you need to get more people there. And that's where a lot of organizations struggle.
I love it. I love everything you're saying, Brady. Where can people get a hold of you?
Going to our websites, great, nextafter.com. Me personally, I actually just deleted Twitter today. I'm taking a Twitter break, but normally I'm at Brady Josephson. LinkedIn, I'd love to connect on LinkedIn. I've had a really, kind of fun time in these COVID times, posting questions, getting in discussions. So you can find me there at Brady Josephson. So those are some ways you can find and connect.
Well, Brady, this was a lot of fun, and we'll have all those links in the show notes for you. Thank you for making time today to come speak to my audience.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.